Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyau Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato Ma Satkamayam Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamayam Mrityorma Amritam Gamayam Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us now and always. In the set of verses that we saw last week, the central theme was that in order for us to be successful in the practice of yoga, we have to avoid all extremes. So not too much eating, not too little eating, not too much sleeping, not too little sleeping, the middle path. In some ways it holds true even for driving. If you are driving in the middle lane, it's much less stressful, because if you are in the left lane, then there will be people who may be wanting to go faster, and then if you are in the rightmost lane, then there will be people getting off the exit, but people coming in the ramp also. But if you are in the middle lane, you don't have to worry about either of these. So anyway, so this is one other example that came to mind where the middle path seems to make things easier. The set of verses that we are going to study today, the first 4 verses that we'll see today, actually address an important question. You might remember that the word yoga, it comes throughout the Gita, and in chapter 2, 3, 4, all these earlier verses, earlier chapters, the word yoga was primarily used in the sense of karma yoga. You might remember in somewhere in the middle of the 2nd chapter, Krishna says, now I have to, let me tell you the path of yoga. So there he is really meaning karma yoga. But now here, when we speak about the middle path, and that in order to practice yoga, you have to practice the middle path, here the yoga doesn't seem to be directly referring to karma yoga. Here yoga, and you see the example we saw in the last verse we studied last week, even as a lamp placed in a place free from any breeze does not flicker, this is the simile for a yogi of controlled mind practicing concentration on the self. So the word yoga here, yunjato yogam atmanaha, so the word yoga is used in the sense of concentration. So the question comes, what is the primary meaning of yoga? Is it karma yoga, yoga work done without detachment, without attachment? Is that the primary meaning of yoga, or the concentration is the primary meaning of yoga? Now that will be addressed in this set of 4 verses, 20 through 23. So we'll chant them all together, and then we'll see their meaning also together. So verse 20, we begin with verse 20. Yatro paramate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya yatra chaivat manatmanam pashyannatmani tushyati sukhamatyantikam yattad buddhigrahyamatīndriyam vetti yatra na caivāyam sthitas chalati tattvataha yam labdhva chaparam labham manyate nadhikam tataha yasmin sthito na dukkhena gurunapi vichalyate tam vidya dukkha sanyoga viyogam yoga saudnitam sanishchayena yoktavyo yogo nirvinna chetasa. Now, because these four verses go together, they have been taken together, and you will read the translation now. That state in which the mind, controlled by the practice of concentration, gets settled, in which, seeing the self by the purified mind, one is satisfied with the self, in which one realizes same absolute transcendent bliss which is experienced through the intellect, established in which one does not waver from the truth, attaining which one thinks of no other acquisition as greater than that, and established in which one is not perturbed even by great pain. That, one should know, is designated as yoga, untouched by all contact with pain. That yoga should be practiced with conviction and without depression of spirits. So the first sentence is a very long sentence with all these different clauses, and each of these clauses is an adjectival clause. Each of these clauses tells us or defines or describes what yoga means. And so we'll take each of these clauses one by one. First, that state in which the mind, controlled by the practice of concentration, gets settled. That's the first phrase in Sanskrit here. Yatra uparamate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya. So, primarily, yoga is a state in which the mind gets settled, controlled by the practice of concentration. You might remember that second sutra. Those of you who have taken a look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, he has a very simple, direct definition of yoga in the sense of concentration. And what he simply says is, yogaha chitta vritti nirodhaha. Chitta is the mind. Vritti, if you visualize a mind like a lake, then all the waves in the mind, they are called vrittis. Nirodhaha means controlling. In a sense, the mind can be seen as a lake, and every thought, every desire, anything that's going on in the mind causes a ripple. And we know that the earlier verse gave the example of a lamp where there is no breeze. But same example holds true even for water. If the water is completely still, there is no breeze, everything is calm, then you can see, and the water is clear, of course, then you can see far deep, and you can almost sometimes see the bottom of the river or the lake. But if the water is dirty, if the water is lashed into waves and ripples, then you can't see it. And we know, obviously, for those who are sailors or those who like boating, if the water is still, it's a joy to row a boat in a still water. It doesn't need too much effort. But if it's lashed with waves and ripples and lot of movement of water, then it's not so easy. Now, our minds are constantly in that state of disturbed water. So yoga primarily means making the mind calm. So that is the first thing. That state in which the mind, controlled by the practice of concentration, gets settled. Next, in that state in which seeing the self by the purified mind, one is satisfied with the self. The phrase in Sanskrit here is Yatra cha eva atmana atmanam pashyan. Literally translated, it means the self seeing itself. Atmani tushyati, one is satisfied within the self. Now the word self comes here 3 times in that line, and that's why you find in the translation they have tried to clarify it. Seeing the self by the purified mind, one is satisfied with the self. One important point in all practice of meditation is really seeing oneself. That's why it's almost like taking a U-turn, which is why in all meditative practices we try to shut the doors which connect us to the world. And the doors that connect us to the world are through the 5 senses. And so it's easier to meditate if my eyes are closed, so that the consciousness that is going out through this doorway of the eyes, this door is closed. There's not much you can do with these doors unless you put some earplugs or something. So the sounds are all going in from here, and the touch is going through the skin, taste is going through the tongue, and so good habit not to be munching something while you are meditating, because again, your mind is going out to the world of taste. In this way, as much as it is practicable, we don't always succeed fully, but as much as it is practicable, we try to shut out all the sensory data. Why should we do it? The reason is, I need to be aware of what's going to happen within us. But if these doors are open, my mind is just going to go out. So first thing I need to do is close the doors. Now once the doors are closed, I need to make my mind take a U-turn and say, okay, now stop looking out for a while, now look at yourself. So it's almost like Sri Ramakrishna gives the example. He said that if some person is walking in the dark and holding a flashlight, now with the help of that flashlight, this person can see wherever the flashlight is focused, you get to see what's in front. And somebody else, other person also, can see with the help of the flashlight wherever the flashlight is moved. Now if someone else coming from the other side wants to see who is holding the flashlight, that person is in the dark because the flashlight is faced on the other side, it's completely dark. So if now I want to see the person who is holding the flashlight, I'll have to say, could you please now turn the flashlight toward yourself so I can get to see who you are? Now that's where our situation is. So the flashlight within us is the light of consciousness. And it's this light of consciousness that is going out through the eyes, through the ears, through all the senses. And then we are able to see, feel, and experience the world around. But the one who is holding this flash is in the dark because all the light is going out. Now, if I have to see this person who is holding this, I have to say, well, turn the light toward yourself. And it is for that reason then, first I say, let me shut the doors. Let me try to prevent the outgoing tendency of this light. And then turn it inward. That is what is meant. In which seeing the self by the self. So that is what we are doing in the meditation. Why is it that when we are beginners in the practice of meditation, we close our eyes. Now we have tried to prevent the light of consciousness as much as sit in a quiet place, don't be eating anything, and so on. So we try not to allow that light of consciousness to go out. Now then we close our eyes. Why do we see darkness? Because now we have prevented the light. We should have been, logically speaking, since we have stopped seeing the the light outside. We should be seeing light here, but yet we see darkness. We see that darkness because we are not able to make the mind take a U-turn there. So that is the first struggle. That is the first struggle in the practice of meditation. When we are able to turn that light inward, you will see when you close your eyes, then it will not be totally dark. It's then that meditation practice begins to bring. It is then that the meditation practice begins to give a deep inner joy. Now that joy which comes does not come from anything from the world, because we have already shut out the world. So that is the joy coming from the self itself, and that is what is meant by saying, in which seeing the self by the mind, one is satisfied with the self. Now that is the goal. One of the primary experiences that all of us have is that while we are satisfied in many ways, there are always some things in life with which we are not satisfied. You ask any person in the world, anywhere, any part of the world, of any age group, in any situation, are you really satisfied with everything? And well, some people might say, oh yeah, I'm just fine. But I don't think most people are being honest when they say that. And of course, we don't have to go on advertising to the world what we are unhappy with. But deep down in our own hearts, we know that there are some things we are not satisfied with. There are things which give us a sense of unfulfillment in life. Now the goal, I mean, what would we say is a state of enlightenment? By definition, the state of enlightenment is one in which one can say, I'm completely fulfilled. I have no desires. I'm satisfied. And that satisfaction comes from being just one's own self. And it's an important thing, because anything in life can be taken away from you, except yourself. So, this is my book. I love my book. This book gives me so much joy. This book, I might lose this book someday, or it might be taken away from me. Then my joy is gone, because my joy depended on this book. So long as the source of my joy is outside of me, it could be a place, it could be people, it could be things, but it's outside of me. There is always, it doesn't mean that it necessarily will be taken away immediately, maybe not immediately, but there is always the possibility that that which is outside of me may be taken away. That which is outside of me, I will be separated from it at some time or the other. And that's just the law of life. Look at the things we possessed, look at the people we knew, look at the places we have been in. We are not always in possession of all of these things all of the time. Sure, some of these things slip away from us, some new things will come. But things come and go. What is it that remains constantly with me all the time? What is it that has never left me and can never leave me? And there is only one thing: myself. I have always been with myself, and nobody can take me away from me. And therefore, if my source of my joy is my own self, I can always be happy, because nobody can take it away from me. So that's the goal, and that's what is happening. So yoga is that state in which, seeing the self by the self, one is satisfied with the self, but doesn't depend on anything outside. Then the third praise. The state in which one realizes same absolute transcendent bliss which is experienced through the intellect. Now, it's actually more than, not exactly the same, but even more than that. So there is a joy that can come to us through many different channels. In order to enjoy a good, delicious ice cream, you may not need too much intellect. Well, if you enjoy ice cream, that's great. There is a joy that can come through art. There is a joy that can come through the ideas, through music, through literature. So mind. Now, the joy that comes through the self does not need the mind or the senses, because again, our senses are not permanent. Our senses are changing. We know that. And if those who are young amongst us may not have realized it yet, as we grow older, we will realize that with age, the power of the senses begins to reduce. Then of course, then you when I didn't need glasses when I was born, now I do. So these senses begin to become weaker as you grow older. So the joy and the knowledge that comes through the senses is being affected. So we have to depend on external supports to kind of not to prevent the further deterioration of my senses. Now, the joy that comes from the self does not depend on either the senses or the mind. And so the same joy that can come to us through this inner mind and the senses, but even a greater joy than that can come through the practice of yoga, the transcendent bliss. It's a state established in which one does not waver from the truth. In Sanskrit, it says, Vetti yatra na chaiva evam sthitas chalati tattvataha. We will see that intellectual conviction is those without even intellectual conviction will find their mind wavering. So it's like this. You say read a book and it seems to make sense. You said, this makes perfect sense. And then you read another book and that says something a little bit different from this. And you say, this makes sense also. And then you read a third book. So you have read 5 books, not exactly saying same thing, perhaps mutually contradicting each other. And as long as you're reading it, you feel, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense. And then there is a big confusion going on within us, in our hearts. And this many of us may have experienced if we indiscriminately catch hold of every book that comes to us and we read it. There is no harm in reading too many books, provided you have some conviction of your own. Because if I don't have any conviction of my own, any position of my own, any principle of my own, if all that I depend on are these thoughts that I get from books, then I'm in deep trouble. Because, what are books? Books are written by people, and they have convictions. And if the book is good, it's written by an author who has some conviction of his or her own. So, if all that I have is a bunch of other people's convictions and no conviction of my own, then I'm going to confuse myself a lot. And most people are confused this way. Swami Vivekananda once very famously said, education is not, I'm not quoting him exactly, but the idea was this. The education is not just some bunch of ideas that we pick up from many different sources and kind of run riot in the head, or just become talking points in conversations with your friends. The mind is very easily wavered. Mind easily wavers. You're in one company, someone said, yeah, and then someone else says something else and you agree with that. So the mind doesn't have a straight focus. Now, if you have a conviction, an intellectual conviction of your own, then from your position of conviction, you can still open yourself. That sometimes it is said, good to have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. So you must have some conviction of your own. And when you feel confident enough that you are in a position to make choices, then you can read any number of books. And when you read, also reflect. Don't simply swallow them. Read and see, well, does it make sense? How does it match with my own convictions? If it is different from what I have believed in or what I think to be right, I need to assess. And then which makes better sense? If I find that the other ideas make better sense than what I have held so far, I must have the courage to then say, okay, maybe my thoughts up to this point were not correct. This makes better sense. But it's just as likely that you might find that the ideas you had up to that point seem to make better sense. Then you need to reject whatever you see. So it's that kind of study which will be beneficial. Now let's say that a person has intellectual conviction. Now the mind becomes fairly stable with intellectual conviction. But even intellectual conviction is not reached a point of complete stability. Even people who are intellectually convinced can get unconvinced. If someone with a better intellectual argument can present it to them and say, well, this is much more logical than what you have believed. And if this person is intellectually honest, we'll say, yeah, that makes sense. So even while the scope for doubt and confusion is relatively less with people with intellectual conviction, but wavering is still possible. But attaining to this state of yoga, established in this state of yoga, one does not waver from the truth. So there is no wavering at all. And this not wavering will occur only if you have actually experienced it. It's a little bit like this. Let's say, just as an example, say some place X, and you have read a lot about that place in a book or gone to Wikipedia and did some study. And then you somehow have got in your head that there is some volcano there. And you are discussing with your friend and you say, you know, that place has a volcano. And the other person said, no, it doesn't have a volcano. And you're quite sure you have read it. So your conviction may make you push that argument. But if the other person is very convinced and says, no, I've been to that place, I've seen that place, there is no volcano there. And then you begin to wonder, oh, maybe I'm just getting confused. Maybe I read it somewhere else. But if you have been there, and if you've actually been and seen that volcano with your eyes, then no matter what, anybody can come and say it doesn't exist. You can say, no, I know, I've seen it. You can see that similar situation when Narendranath, Vivekananda as a young man, went asking the religious leaders of his time, have you seen God? And the kind of intellectual, ambiguous answers he got from people who are good, who are sincere seekers. But when he went to Ramakrishna, he got a simple answer. Have you seen God? Yes. There wasn't any philosophizing, there wasn't any trying effort to intellectually convince him about the reality of God. The answer was simply, yes, I've seen God. Now that's the thing. If I have actually seen something, experienced it directly, there'll be no doubt in our heart. That is the state of yoga, in which there is no wavering at all. Attaining which one thinks of no other acquisition as greater than that. This is in verse 22, first line. Yam labdhva cha aparam labham manyate tadhikam tataha. Think about it this way. ask your own mind, what is it that I want most in my life? Of course, many of you are already coming to Vedanta, and I'm sure you will say, oh, it's the moksha or something. Well, that is the highest. But if you ask most people, what is it that you would most like to have? What would you think as the greatest acquisition? And you will see, whatever answer they may give, there'll always be something more that they will want afterwards. Even people who have won lotteries or several $1 million and then they go and interview them after 6 months or a year, they don't seem particularly completely satisfied with it either. And but this state, this is the state attaining which one wants nothing more, nothing greater. There is nothing greater than that. There is that Tulsidasa's song is there. Raghuvara Chabi Saman. He is trying to describe the beauty of Rama's face, and Tulsidas in his song. And so he begins by saying, Rama's face is like, and now you have to give some metaphor, some simile. How is Rama's face like? And sometimes we see in poetry and other places, people have said, oh, it's your face is like a moon-like face. And nowadays, no one will say that now that we know what's there on the moon. But in olden days, comparing someone's face to a moon was like, oh, it was such a great thing. So when you try to give a simile, provide a simile, your face is like that, you want to praise someone. And so Tulsidas, when he was writing this song, he's saying, Rama's face is like, and he stopped. Then he's trying to think, which would be the best simile to describe Rama's face? And he's thinking, and I mean, what else? No worldly material thing can measure up to Rama's face. And so then he ends up there in that song, he said, Rama's face is like Rama's face. There is nothing else. There is nothing else can come anywhere close to the beauty of Rama's face. And this is exactly like that. So this is a state, the acquisition of yoga. This is such an acquisition that once you have it, you cannot say, all right, now I'm bored with it. Now I want something else. If you're bored with it, means you have not attained that state. That's what it means. Next. And established in which one is not perturbed even by great pain. Now this pain that is spoken of here is the existential pain. So it's not as if, let's say, if a person established in this yoga, who is enlightened, if someone goes and saying there is some cut, if they fall down, if they have an accident, of course they are going to feel pain. And yet it says is not perturbed by him. So first of all, they are not perturbed by it, but the pain here is a more deeper, subtler kind of pain. And I've referred to this on earlier occasions, that there are at least two ways we can understand the sorrow that we all experience in life. Most of the time when we use the word sorrow or pain, it refers to the sorrow or pain that we experience in our day-to-day lives. The kind of pain and sorrow that can come through hunger, through homelessness, through betrayal, and so on. The kind that everyone experiences to a lesser or greater degree every day. And that's definitely painful. That's really sorrow. A lot of people are suffering in the world because of that. But there is a deeper kind of sorrow, a deeper kind of pain, which everyone is suffering from it, but most people don't even know about it. Now you will say, well, how can you, if you're suffering from it, how can you not know about it? It's a little bit like, let's say if someone is suffering from a really serious illness, but there are no external symptoms, it's remained undiagnosed, and this person is having a headache. And a headache, of course, is painful. So this person is worrying so much about the headache. Oh, I'm having a headache, I need to take a Tylenol. But completely unaware that there is a major undiagnosed illness within. So it's possible to be the suffering from something and yet not be aware of it. Because we are aware of something which is more immediate. Headache, that I immediately feel it, I need to do something about it. Exactly in the same way, there is an undiagnosed illness within every living creature. There is nothing much you can do about it in some ways because it is existential. By existential, I mean, I'm using the word in a literal sense, it is associated with our very existence as human beings. So, if we are human beings, we are already suffering from it just because we are human beings. You can't help it. So, as long as you exist as human beings, you're going to have this illness. And the one word that is given in our books for this illness is called bhavaroga, the illness of the world, illness of samsara. What are its characteristics? Among the many characteristics it has, one is what Krishna will mention later on, it will come in this thing. Janma mrityu jara vyadhi, the life as some of the inevitable truths of life which we all know exist, but which we don't have too much time to ponder over, are the process of aging, sickness, death, very stark realities of life, and none of those are joy-giving. All of them can be producing stress, sorrow, suffering. We are already, day by day, we are already aging. And as I sometimes say, no matter how much organic food you eat, sometime or the other we are going to fall sick. There's nobody in the world who can say, I've never fallen sick. And of course, death. Not to speak of just the mind, which goes up and down with stress, anxiety, worry. And there just doesn't seem a way out of this because, well, we have a body and we didn't design this body, but this seems to be just a manufacturing defect, if you like. A buggy update of the mind and the body. And the only way to be free from these defects of the body and mind as human beings is to stop being a human being. Stop being a living being. Now, what do we stop being? Well, by living, I don't mean then be a dead being. I don't mean that. As long as I remain limited, whether living or dead, as long as I am finite, I cannot be free from these things. So the only way to be free from these things is to be infinite, to be divine. The good news is that we are already divine. So we don't have to become anything. We are already divine. The problem is we have forgotten it. The problem is we have begun to think of ourselves as human beings. And the solution is really simple. Stop thinking of yourself as a human being. Be divine. And the only way I can affirm my divinity is by living like a divine being. So every time I want to be nasty, every time I want to hurt someone, every time I want to, I must ask myself, is this how a divine being would act? Is this how a divine being would speak? And sometimes we will then, it's almost like shaming ourselves into it. It's almost like someone is elected to the office of a president, of a prime minister, or some high position. Now that person has to be very vigilant and remember, now I'm holding this position. Would a president behave this way? Would a prime minister behave this way? And so automatically that person's behavior will be modified as long as that person doesn't forget what position he or she is holding. Now, if we want to now be firm in this position of a divine being, I need to be vigilant and say, I cannot live like an ordinary, selfish, mortal, human insect. I must be divine. I must do things which are associated with divinity. That is what is meant here. Only in that way, we will never be perturbed by this deep existential pain. So all of these adjectives we read so far, let me read it once again. Yoga is a state in which the mind, controlled by the practice of concentration, gets settled. It is a state in which, seeing the self by the purified mind, one is satisfied with the self. It is a state in which one realizes same absolute transcendent bliss, which is experienced through the intellect. It is a state established in which one does not waver from the truth. It is a state attaining which one thinks of no other acquisition as greater than that. And it is a state established in which one is not perturbed even by great pain. That is designated as yoga. So here Krishna gives in these 4 verses a very comprehensive definition of yoga. What it means here is this. Primarily, here, yoga does mean concentration. Now, karma yoga is also called yoga because karma yoga purifies my heart. It purifies my mind. Chitta shuddhi. And because it purifies my heart and mind, only then concentration is possible. So, karma yoga becomes an indirect way of attaining that concentration. And therefore, karma yoga is also referred to as yoga. But in this chapter, yoga means concentration. That yoga should be practiced with conviction. Conviction means shraddha. And without depression of spirits, means cheerfulness. That's very important. A quote of Vivekananda that I like always is, by being cheerful and smiling, no, he begins the saying, one can be nearer to God. By being cheerful and smiling, one can be nearer to God, nearer than any prayer. That is the importance given to cheerfulness. And that's why, as I mentioned last time, one very important quality we need as spiritual seekers is to be cheerful, to learn to look at everything in a positive way. Some of the things will naturally be very positive. There is no problem there. But some of the things may not always be so positive. Some of the things may appear pretty dull or boring or even bleak. Even in such situations, can I keep my spirit high? Can I learn to maintain a positive mental attitude? Can I force myself to be cheerful even when things don't look so good? If I can do that, then that practice of yoga will lead to all these wonderful results. It is a very important 4 verses. I would encourage you to reflect on it when you go home. So we have a few minutes. Do you have any questions, thoughts on this? No? Yeah, just a minute. He can.
Just a little clarification.
Hold it closer. You're okay. Yeah.
Just a little clarification for me. Can you hear? About conviction. Yes, if you read just indiscriminately books, and you will be confused, most of us. But if you don't read books, where would this conviction come from? Is it innate? Are you born with it?
No. You see, there is reading. There is such a thing. Reading can be a passive activity. Reading can be a very active thing. Passive means if you are just kind of consuming. You're just a consumer. All the ideas come, they just go in and just stay there. Then there is no such thing as conviction, because you're just, it's like things come in the warehouse and you just dump them. There is nothing much to be done. But as the ideas go in, I then decide, I'm able to think, oh, does this idea make sense? Where does it the mental picture I already have in my mind about that subject, where does this idea fit in? Can it fit in there? If it doesn't fit in there, should I even keep it or just toss it out? So this way of analyzing the information that we put in our head and assigning them their value, that is what gives us conviction. Then it's a very active process. Then you're not simply allowing it to go, you are thinking about it. And that's why it is said that there are times when we should allow unrestricted entry, and there are times where it should be a restricted entry. Now, by that I mean, when you are sure of the source from which the information is coming, the authenticity of the source, then I think it's good to give an unrestricted entry. When you're not so sure, then you be the gatekeeper. And then you say, before I allow this thing to go inside, I'm going to decide whether this thing should be allowed in or not. And I say this for this reason. Let's say you're reading, now for me personally, and for many of us I would imagine, if you're reading a book of Vivekananda or Ramakrishna. Now, for many of us, the authenticity of that source is unquestioned. And so, I don't have to be at the gate to analyze every little thought before I allow it to go in, because that way I may not be able to get the full gist of what is being said. And so sometimes if I'm sure about the source, then you just absorb everything that comes in. And again, you don't have to just allow it to stay there inside without interacting with it. You don't have to just believe it blindly. But once you allow it inside, then you have plenty of time then to reflect over it, think what it says. On the other hand, if you are not sure about the source from which any information is coming, then you don't want just any kind of sundry ideas to go inside and create all confusion. So that's the example actually the Buddha gave in one of his discourses. He said that if it's raining and you kind of cover your garden with a silk cloth, then no water is going to reach the soil, and your plants will die because there is no nourishment. You are not allowing the water to go in. And so he said, just open your net wide, and so let the water come and nourish the garden. But what if it's an acid rain? And now we know, nowadays there is. Rain always, some parts of the world, sometimes that rain can be harmful. That time it's not very judicious to allow anything to just fall into your garden. So that's what I mean. Because for instance, when Vivekananda spoke, if someone is just sitting there listening to the lecture and saying, I'm not sure what he's saying, and so every statement he makes, I'm going to analyze it, it's fine. Everyone has freedom to do what they want. But my only point is, if I stop at every sentence analyzing it, I'm going to miss the next 3 sentences. So I'm going to be the loser. On the other hand, as I said, we have to decide when I should trust the source and when I should not trust the source. That's a subjective judgment everyone has to make. So there will be occasions in life when it is helpful to not restrict. There will be occasions in life when it is actually helpful to be vigilant to see what's going on. Because the thing is this, oftentimes many people find that the junk, even material object going inside the house, don't go out. People are reluctant to throw it away. It just goes in a basement or a garage. It's worse if it's in a sense of ideas. If some totally misleading idea enters the head, there is no easy way to take it out and throw. And it's going to remain there. And so the junk in the head is much difficult to get rid of than junk in your basement. And so we have to be careful of what we allow to put there. You want to take the mic? Yeah. Jason?
I have a question about who is doing the choosing about what's going on. Because if the human being is the only one with the capacity or the need to choose, and the human being by default is a gravely ill being, then the choices that it's making, how can you trust about what it's doing?
Good point. Well, we have to. We are the choosers ourselves. There is nobody else to choose from. Luckily, there are things which can help us make a good choice. And there are three things mentioned in the texts which can be guidelines to help us make a choice. And they are called simply the Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava in Sanskrit. Shruti means that scripture itself. So if there could be things which I'm not sure what is to be done. One way would be to go to some authentic textual source. Now that source could be either in the form of text or in the form of, say, one's guru. A teacher or a scripture is one dependable source which can help us make choices. Second is yukti. Yukti means reason. Apply our reason. Sure, our minds may not have become very refined yet, but even in our present state, we cannot say we are totally bereft of logic. Or some people probably are. But most of us, we do make choices in life. I think life would be impossible for someone who says, I cannot take any decision. Because we do. As simple as, what should I have for breakfast today? Should I have my coffee now or half an hour later? I mean, we do. So we do make these choices. So it's not as if we are completely ignorant about how to choose. So based on our knowledge, based on our own reasoning, even though it may not be perfect, that's a second way. And third is through anubhava, through experience. So yes, I might make a choice, and through experience I realize, bad choice. But I've learned something. I've learned that in that situation, that choice was wrong. Now I have become a little wiser. So next time something similar happens, if I do the same choice again, means I've not learned anything. But if my past experience has taught me something, then I will choose the opposite. And then I will not make a wrong choice. So either go through a trusted source, use your intellect, and learn from your own experience. So these are the ways we have to make choices in life. Not all choices are going to be perfect. We are going to make mistakes. But there is not a single person in the whole world who can say, I've never made a mistake. So everyone makes mistakes. Everyone does stupid things. Where we can distinguish ourselves from them is, have I learned from my stupidity? Have I learned from my mistakes? That's in our hands to do. Is that okay? Anything else? Okay, so we will stop here today. So please, if you get a chance, before we meet next week, read these 4 verses again. These are very, very comprehensive definition of yoga that Krishna gives here. And if you have any further doubts on these 4 verses, we can address them next week. And then we will begin next week on verse number 24. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. We bow down to Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. Our subject on Sunday will be the purpose of a retreat. Next Wednesday we'll continue with the study, and on Tuesday and Saturday we will have the Arati and meditation as usual. So you're welcome for these programs. We'll conclude with the prayer on page 3 of your books. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.